Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. My name is John Froelich, and I am super excited to be here with Jay Lepera from Juniper Networks. Jay has been a friend, a colleague, and just an awesome customer to work with over the past few years. Jay, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know how busy you are with everything going on at Juniper, so thank you for that.
Thank you for having me, John. Pleasure to be with you.
It's my pleasure. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself. You have a really amazing background, first with Autodesk and now with Juniper Networks.
Yeah, and several others in between and before, and
There you go.
hopefully not after. Yeah, so it's been about 20 years here in Silicon Valley, essentially in the software industry, um, essentially as an enterprise architect these days. Now, my resume is a mix of good business experience, IT experience, and I think most recently more strategy experience.
Mhm.
Um, these days we talk a lot about software transformation, and it's actually a concept that I've been working on for probably the better part of a 20-year career here in Silicon Valley.
Wow.
Going back to the early 2000s and even the late 1990s, um, with essentially this transition from what started off as perpetual licenses, companies shipping CDs, shipped by box,
Mhm.
to today, to what you see is a very mature range of kind of software delivery, from subscription term license, SaaS, and
Yeah,
consumption, and indeed more to come.
absolutely. So, and yeah, and I can see that, and I think we can all see that in companies like, Autodesk, make AutoCAD and the software. But tell us a little bit. You're at Juniper Networks now. Tell the audience a little bit about Juniper Networks and how does this, what is the subscription economy for Juniper Networks?
Well, interestingly, Juniper has always sold software,
Hmm.
but maybe didn't always monetize it in the ways that I mentioned earlier. So these days, we're at Juniper putting a lot of time and effort and thought into our subscription transformation, if you will. And what you find at Juniper is a little bit of everything, right? We have perpetual licenses. We have perpetual license with maintenance. We have subscription term license, SaaS, consumption, and pretty much every flavor in the wild. We have a little bit of that at Juniper.
Right. And the beauty, by the way, of Juniper Networks is everything we're talking about in the SaaS and the networking and the communications, you couldn't do any of this without Juniper Networks because you guys make the devices and software and networking equipment that make it all possible, right?
Correct. Started off as essentially that core IP routing company, right? If you go to the telephone company central office, or if you wonder how you're being delivered this particular podcast, it's probably routed through Juniper hardware.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been expanded in a lot of different areas: security, enterprise, campus, and branch grade networks, cloud,
Mhm.
your big hyperscalers, all Juniper customers.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I know. I remember as an AT&T employee that we were, we used a lot of Juniper equipment in the network operation centers and a lot of the tools and certainly in the backbone. So great product, great company. So you and I have talked about this evolution of the digital solutions economy, everybody moving to these ideas, as you said so well, the subscription economy, usage models, consumption models, outcome-based models, maybe even revenue sharing models. And you have a really interesting perspective, Jay, on that evolution. And you talk about it in the idea of it maybe a two by two, but the idea of capacity. What do you mean by that? And tell us a little bit more.
Well, I think a typical or classical approach to this kind of a transformation is to uh, understand it in terms of your product readiness and your market readiness, or in other words, your customer readiness. So
Hmm.
a typical kind of strategic exercise might be to line up your product portfolio on such a two by two matrix, right? So thinking of an x-axis as your market readiness, your y-axis as your product readiness, and you're essentially plotting out, in terms of each business model, how that would align with your product portfolio, right? In other words, are you ready to be a SaaS? Is that even a viable deployment option, right? Based on the current status of your product, the R&D and the infrastructure of it.
Right. And tell us a little bit more, because you talk also about the whole idea of the market itself, and what are some of the characteristics? Let's talk about the market maybe, and what are the characteristics of a market that maybe is ready and the ones that aren't ready or maybe never will be ready for that?
It's a good question. So on the market side, kind of understanding the customer's dilemma, right? We've seen examples, say, in desktop computing where it might be a little awkward to try to deliver something via the cloud entirely, right? They'll essentially need an executable program on their desktop, and you essentially have a perpetual license and perhaps maintenance, right?
Right.
Whereas in other cases, the product might be, even though it's perpetual license, if you will, installed on a laptop, it might be a good candidate for telemetry and pay as you go, right? If the customer's use, say, perhaps is too casual to fit into your perpetual licensing, price schema, giving them an option to kind of pay as you go, perhaps buy some credits and consume as they use it, can be a very effective way to, not only drive your revenue, but also to drive that customer experience, right? That, maybe certain products in your product families they will license and use every day, but other ones maybe they only need a little bit, and therefore, if your product is ready to accept telemetry and accept that kind of usage signaling according to the customer usage pattern, you can monetize it that way, and perhaps deliver an even better customer experience than you might expect.
Right. And you, yeah, that's a great point. And certain customers are ready for that, and certain customer markets or certain customer experiences aren't ready for that. I can't, I sit looking at my beautiful Dell desktop computer with my NVIDIA GeForce gaming tools in there and say, I can't imagine not having a desktop computer. I remember the days when everybody said, oh, all you're going to have is a monitor and everybody's going to be connected through some kind of a terminal at some point in time. And, I don't know if that's, is that ever going to happen that way, right? But there are so many other services that I never would have imagined that I would have absorbed as a usage-based model. So you make a great point, about that. But then you think about the customers themselves, not the customers themselves, rather the products themselves, your company's readiness. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, it's not just how do you define the product readiness, but also your company readiness, right?
Right. Well, obviously your R&D, your infrastructure is a factor, but I think also your ability to execute that in your kind of quote to cash and fulfillment
Exactly.
pipeline, if you will, right? So that's where we start talking about, various enterprise quote to cash and subscription billing, subscription management solutions on the market today, right? You and I have worked a lot on SAP, but there are many on the market today, depending on your requirements, the size of your company, what your needs are, and then
Exactly.
there's a whole menu to pick from.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're most familiar with Brim and IR is where we find typically the largest of software companies, and we tend to think about things like massive scale, like what if you have, say, an in-application purchase, right? Say like a Microsoft Xbox, where you might be actually selling features in the application in real time, accepting user credit card in real time. So that concept of massive scale, or maybe a similar concept of unlimited creativity in your offering, right? Like I
That's an
said, that
interesting idea. Yeah.
the ability to bundle or the ability to in real time kind of dynamically create an offer. and monetize it.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
another 21st century topic, to say the least. And then clearly,
Absolutely.
if you're a public company, compliance, right, and reporting, and to be able to
Absolutely. Well, yeah,
demonstrate.
and then you obviously you have to report on all of that according to all of the guidance and all of that, and certainly, Juniper uses SAP RAR for that. You use a lot of several different solutions, but why how does SAP and how does SAP RAR help you scale, and what value do you get from that?
Well, SAP itself would typically be the most scalable of solutions on the market. Obviously, moving to cloud could be a whole nother world in terms of scale.
Yeah.
Um, then in compliance, SAP has always had the reputation for optimal compliance standards and reporting. Um, Not the only solution on the market for this, but clearly, if you have that SAP ERP, then uh, you'd immediately suspect RAR would be the desired revenue solution
Mm-hmm.
to process these kind of flows through your quote to cash, or perhaps even like I'm saying, the telemetry based on maybe an evergreen contract or something like this. Then when it comes to compliance, the reporting as well is a key factor of this. Think both operationally reporting to ensure that you're meeting all your controls and standards, and operational reporting to be meeting local statutory, say for example with credit card, all the laws and
Yeah.
data
Yeah.
retention requirements on credit card, and then clearly at the end of this, that's your SEC financial statements for a public company, right? Being able to combine this RAR with maybe parts of your business that
Yeah.
aren't monetized this way, or perhaps have nothing to do with revenue, but do need to roll up into your financial statements and
Right. And
combine
and
with.
and the fact that you can integrate it with non-SAP, integrate the whole thing with SAP or non-SAP solutions, you know, um, you would think gives you that flexibility and insight to execute more quickly, right?
Correct. If perhaps your, say, for example, in the subscription billing arena, there are many solutions on the market that have varying um, strengths and weaknesses. If you're, say, for example, in our case, we have M&A who was using something else, right? So the
Right.
ability to accept incoming data from that, even though it's not directly through our quote-to-cash cycle, and process it through revenue accounting with all the requisite rules for 606 and
Yeah.
primarily contract combination and SSP, right, being the key piece on the front end.
Absolutely. Yeah. That SSP and the contract combination, I think I hear that 20 times a week, probably. So, yeah. So in wrapping up, how important is it for a company like yours or others to pick a partner that has expertise in these spaces, and you know what does it mean for you for that?
Well, I find absolutely critical. It's
Mhm.
to have experts come and help you, decipher your needs and implement them. I think is critical. Beyond most companies would not have in-house that the needed depth of their bench to go through just the implementation on its own. Um, Certainly, Bramsol proven to be one of the best, if not the best, in this revenue accounting space at
Great.
providing that implementation guidance.
Well, excellent. Well, Jay, thank you so much for your time. I know we trying to keep this short. I thought that was tremendous insight. Really thinking about the evolution. You've been at this a long time. You've seen a lot of things. Like they say in the State Farm, right? We've seen a lot of things. You've been around. You've done a lot. So I appreciate that insight. I love the idea of the readiness, the capacity. Um, so thank you for that. Any parting words? Any last thoughts? For somebody who might listen to this and say, "Wow, how do I think about this and get started?" Any last thoughts for anyone?
Yeah, I think with these types of endeavors where they're talking about subscription management or subscription billing or revenue accounting, I think that your North Star needs to be customer success, right?
Hmm.
Whether you're envisioning your product roadmap or your enterprise landscape, a successful journey will be one that treasures customer success as its North Star. And you'd be surprised, I've seen over the years how um, with that strategy, you will generate more revenue and more success for your company than if you perhaps just took the impression of monetizing software on its own rather than thinking of generating that win-win with the customer.
That's a great point. Well, Jay, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure as always. Every time we get together, I learn something. So thank you so much for that. And I appreciate all your time and look forward to speaking with you and working with you guys as you continue your journey down the digital solutions economy, as we say.
Thank you, John. Great to be with you.
All right. Make it a great one.